Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome District Court Judge in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and U.S. Army veteran, Lou Olivera.
In 1984, when I was a younger boy or younger man, I was laying in the bed in the middle of the night, and my uncle woke me up in the middle of the night. The room was dark, and I could see his face barely from the light in the hall. And he'd been crying, and he woke me up and told me that my mother was killed a few hours earlier in a car accident. And ever since that moment, I went from different homes. My parents were divorced when I was young, and so I went and stayed with many different aunts and uncles, different homes. And like many families in our country or throughout the world, my family suffered with drugs and alcohol. Some dying from the disease, overdoses, some suffering from and dying from HIV for their addictions. So I went from different homes and saw the stress and the effects of drugs and alcohol at a very early age. At one point, I decided to see what I was going to do in my future, and I decided, like many of us in this room, to go take the ASVAB. I thought I was going to do something exciting and maybe drive a tank or and I thought that was my ceiling, coming from a poor family in a poor town in Long Island, New York. I thought that was, and that's okay. I've worked as a mechanic and food service, and those are honorable jobs. And I thought that was my ceiling. So I took the ASVAB, and they decided, instead of letting me ride a tank or drive a tank, they decided to put me in some field called counterintelligence. Didn't know what that really meant, but I was going to go do it. So they shipped me off to Fort Huachuca, and eventually I made my way to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a young private, and eventually deployed to the Gulf War, where I served there doing counterintelligence, counterterrorism operations. Redeployed back to Fort Bragg, Cumberland County, where I remain today. Decided to try my hand in higher education. I applied to undergraduate school thinking, they're not going to take me. Well, they did, and so off to college I went. After college, decided to apply to law school. They're not going to take me. Well, they took me, so I went to law school and had the student loans to show. Eventually, I stayed in Cumberland County. I decided to run for office as a judge, thinking, they're not going to vote for me. Well, they did. So now I'm a judge in Cumberland County, North Carolina, which is home to Fort Bragg, 82nd Airborne, home of the Airborne, Special Ops. It's the largest military installation in the nation. Fort Bragg has the largest active duty population and the highest percentage of retirees in the nation. So as I often say, in Fort Bragg or Cumberland County, you can't sling a stick without hitting a soldier. So there I sit as one of the judges out of 10 for Cumberland County. I'm the only combat vet on the bench, and I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of what the service gave me, the confidence to kind of think I can be more, and it gave me more, especially coming from an area of a life where I didn't have much family, and so the hardships of normal everyday life or the effects of drug and alcohol. So I sit in our Cumberland County Veterans Treatment Court, where in Vets Court we identify those individuals coming through the court system that are veterans, and many from the effects of war, suffering from PTSD or substance abuse or alcoholism as a result of their service-related injuries. I've sat in that court. It's our first court in Cumberland County, which, like I said, is the largest military community in the nation, second in the state, but it's not a new concept. It was started in Buffalo, New York, and many of them are working nowadays throughout the nation. I think it's a wonderful thing. So I sit there and we do this intensive treatment in Vets Court, trying to help with the recidivism rate of our U.S. service members. And I often say is they used to dress, and they can again. And so many of them dealing with PTSD, substance abuse issues. And that's where I met one of my many fellow veterans, a guy named Joe. Joe is a SF soldier, short, stocky guy. Several tours in Afghanistan, injured several times. He's had some issues in his life and found his way into the criminal justice system where we found him. and trying to help him find his way back again. Joe slipped a couple times, and we all want to be held accountable. We all should be held accountable. No better, no worse, I say. So Joe had some issues, and I had to sentence Joe to a night in jail. I never find solace in sending anyone away, but it's a criminal justice system, and we have to be held accountable. And Joe did as well, and he knew it. So as the day came that Joe had to report to jail, I sat in my office and eating my lunch, a hearty cup of yogurt. And the court happened to end early that day, and so my team reminded me that Joe was going to be reporting to the jail. And so since court ended a little bit early, I walked over to the jail and I waited for Joe to walk on in. And he did. He's an SF soldier, stocky, shoulders all tight. That's the way he usually runs anyway. But he walked in and it was different. Joe was different. He was sweating, he was trembling, and you could tell he was somewhat duress. I think anyone would be. But I knew Joe's story. Joe, like I said, served several tours in Afghanistan, injured several times. One time he was talking to a Taliban fighter, and when Joe turned his head for just a moment, he heard a ping. And many of you have had any type of training, especially with grenades. He knew the moment he heard that ping what it was, seconds before the grenade exploded. Another time, Joe was injured when his SF teams was in back of a armored carrier, and it overturned into a ravine, locking his team in the back. His team drowned in front of him. And as Joe says, the water, he thought he was going to drown, as the water rose to his thighs, to his chest, and stopped at his chin. So Joe had an issue with small spaces as well. So Joe walks into the jail. I see him trembling, I see him under distress. I was supposed to go home that evening and grill some great Greek burgers with my wife and family. But I knew when I saw Joe, I wasn't going home that night. So they had Joe in the jail, and when the jail cell opened, I walked in. There's that maxim, the Warriors Code, I think most of us know it, is that we'll never leave a fallen comrade behind. So I walked through the door of the jail cell, and as it closed behind us, I spent the night, the sentence, with Joe. Joe wouldn't have left me behind, and I wouldn't leave my comrade, my family, behind either. I'm Lou Olivera, and I'm a U.S. Army veteran.